Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
In this thread we tell ghost stories that scared the shit out of you, personal or otherwise. I'll start. When I was 15, I had one remaining activity to complete for my Bronze Duke of Edinburgh award, the Expedition. Basically, this involved a 2-day hike in the wilderness, 1 day and 1 night. I was fortunate to be one of the younger members of our 9-person group. I kind of took a backseat in a lot of the decision-making, so it was pretty cruisy. All I had to do was keep up with the crowd, demonstrate my knowledge and training, and stick to the plan. Day 1. So off we set, after being dropped off in the Highlands of Bonnie, Scotland. I can't remember the exact distance we had to cover by evening, but we set a fairly brisk pace, and everyone seemed well up to the task. We had decided to make camp on government land, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. There was the occasional sign of previous habitation in the area, the odd raised dilapidated foundations peeking out of the heather. At around 6 p.m., we entered what I can only describe as a long upward sloping shallow valley. It was around 300 m wide and a few km long. One side was about half the height of other, and behind the shorter side was going to be the final resting place of the slowly setting spring sun. It's at this time that I notice a member of our group, Ben, looking a little uncertain, uncomfortable, straining his eyes, looking way off into the distance, seemingly transfixed on the top of the slope with the sun setting behind it. I couldn't make out what he was staring at. I asked him if everything was okay, and he quietly replied, "Uh-huh." At around 6:45, the sky was darkening, and the sun was a few whites above the slope. We were in the process of setting up camp, tents, fire, etc., when we saw a figure approaching from down the other slope. The team leader got up to meet the person approaching the camp, and we all fell silent to listen in on what was being said. Turns out he was a local, a farmer I assume, out walking and just wanted to have a friendly chat. There was a brief exchange of pleasantries, the usual, who we were, what we were doing, etc. The guy had lived in the area for most of his life. Before he left, he told the team leader that it was not a great idea staying in this particular area. Didn't elaborate on why exactly, and suggested that we go with him a few km away and stay at a local campsite. We advised that we couldn't do that, and we had to adhere to our plan in order to qualify for our award. It was at this time that I became quite concerned with Ben. Now, I'm quite an empathic person. I can always read people's state moods within a few moments of meeting them. I also pick up on any personality changes very easily. Ben had me quite worried because as soon as we'd entered this valley, he'd effectively shut up completely. He looked worried. This made me want to find out why, as it was unsettling me too. He was still blanking the group, back turned to the campfire, still staring up this slope. He looked like he was in a trance, fully mesmerized. It was getting much darker now, and decided to sit next to him and try to see what he was transfixed on. I could sort of make out a tree-shaped object, not many branches, very dark, and about 4 people tall. I tapped Ben on the shoulder, and he snapped round to stare me in the eyes. He looked scared, absent. "What is it?" I asked him. "Can you see that?" he queried, pointing to the top of the slope. "What, that tree?" I suggested. He moved back to his original position, and didn't say anything for a few moments. "I think it's getting closer," he said quietly. He was deadpan. Serious. This made the hairs on my arms stand on end. What an odd thing to say. With a cocked eyebrow, I turned back around and resumed the campfire banter. At around 8 o'clock the sun finally disappeared behind the hill, and it became colder and almost completely dark. The moon was out. It was also a clear night, no clouds and no wind. Quite a nice Scottish night, actually. I once again checked on Ben, who was still sitting there staring up the slope. A couple of other team members had inquired as to why he was being antisocial, but they got the same weird statements. Something moving. Something getting closer. To be honest, at this stage in the evening, I couldn't see anything clearly up the slope anymore. maybe a trace outline of an object. Being guys under 17, away from home, we decided that the 9:30 curfew was way too early. Everyone was having a great time, ironically, telling ghost stories which put us on edge, but as we're in a big group and sleeping in 3-man tents, no one was particularly freaked out. Except Ben. I was periodically checking on him. The odd glance his way every half hour or so. A few times I sat next to him and asked him to just ignore what was bothering him. All he kept saying was, "It's getting closer." At around 10 p.m. I humored him and tried to make out what he was looking at. I got my maglet and shone it up the slope. I could make out the tree barely, and I don't know if the light was playing tricks on me, but it did look closer. I told Ben we would check it out in the morning. So finally, at around 10:50, myself and Ben were sitting around the dying campfire, and I pretty much ordered him to go to bed. He was totally freaked out. I considered it my responsibility now to make sure he got to sleep and he was safe. Please see the tent diagram, this is important. As you can see, Ben was sleeping the furthest away from the door. Soon I was fast asleep. Suddenly I was jolted awake by a harrowing scream. The tent was freezing. The door to the tent was flapping in a calm breeze. Ben was laying across both myself and Darren's legs unconscious. I sat there in the darkness, slowly becoming aware that Ben had pissed himself, and the side of my sleeping bag was warm and moist. Darren pushed Ben's legs over to his sleeping bag and tried to close the tent. I tried to wake up Ben. Initially, it was futile. It took me a good 5 minutes to get him to come around, and he was totally freaked out. More scared than I had ever seen anyone in my life. All he kept saying was that she tried to take me, and other permutations of some woman trying to lift him out of the tent. Whilst recounting, Darren was trying desperately to get the tent door zipped up, but to no avail. He ended up putting a safety pin in it. Suffice it to say, both Darren and I were speechless and terrified. So much so that we didn't leave the tent until first light, and somehow we all managed to drift off until then. Well, at around 6:30 a.m. I once again awoke. Ben was lying face down on top of his sleeping bag, shivering. Darren and I were both pretty groggy, but remembered everything freaky thing that had happened at 3 to 4 a.m. The team leader called out for everyone to get up and come and get breakfast on the go. It was then that was started to notice some bizarre, out-of-place things about the tent. 1. The top of the tent was singed. Like if you were to get a spray can and use a lighter for about 2 seconds. Just enough to melt but not burn. 2. The door zipper had melted. No burn marks, just warped plastic. The fly sheet at the entrance of the tent was singed black. 3. As Ben stirred and looked at me, I noticed he had blisters on his forehead. He did not look good. So, skip an hour or so. We had all eaten, and Ben finally decided to tell us what had happened to him after much encouragement from me. What he said freaked us out big time, but it didn't stop there. Basically, he'd been fixated on something up the slope that he felt was drawing him in. He couldn't take his eyes away from this thing. He'd become convinced that whatever he was staring at was moving, albeit very slowly, towards our camp. After finally getting to sleep, he was suddenly awoken by an intense heat. He said that he could see light behind his eyelids on his face. Apparently he was face to face with what he describes as a woman all in black, screaming at him, engulfed in flames. She was trying to get him to help her, begging for him to take her hand. He of course had a complete sensory overload and passed out. Everyone, bar us 3, was high skeptical to say the least. It wasn't until we showed everyone the tent that doubts began to creep into the minds of the doubters. So, with increasing haste, our camp was packed up, a record dismantling in my opinion. The fire was doused with water, and we were very keen to get out of the area ASAP. It was with some encouragement from Darren and I that the team leader hesitantly decided to come with 4 others to see what was on the top of that slope. Well, it was a fair trek, about 500 meters, but we eventually got there. I shit you not, I was gobsmacked by what we discovered, for standing solitary like a pillar of black was a tree. A tree that had been fashioned into a post. It was caked in soot and cinders, and at its base was a plaque. The plaque read something like this: "Here stands some Celtic name, post, a place used to burn witches from X to Y. 103 witches were burned here." Sorry, I don't remember the exact words. Needless to say, we found ourselves at the bottom of that slope pretty damn quickly. To this day, I swear that this happened. It's the closest I've come to seeing a ghost.
Here's one. About 2 years ago, I was at a friend's house with my girlfriend, his girlfriend and his cousin, and it got late, so I walked my GF home. I cut across a small field to cut the walk by a good 20 minutes. After I dropped my GF home, I set off back across the field. Keep in mind it was winter and it was pitch black 10 p.m. As I got to the opening to the field, I got a phone call from my friend's GF, we'll call her G, saying her dad had gone missing and to look out for him on the way home. I said okay, put the phone down and continued on like the cocky brave fucker I was. As I got to the top of a little hill about 5 minutes into my walk, I heard angry shouting, not casual angry though, mental shouting, the shit you hear in hospitals. He was shouting, "Where the fuck are you? I'll fucking kill you, you twats." I fucking noped it and froze at the top of the hill and phoned G, and told her what I heard. She got her mom, brother, boyfriend and boyfriend's cousin to come meet me to help the search, which I never fucking agreed to. I was teamed up with G's big brother to scout the darker parts of the field. In the end we were walking around for a good hour shouting for G's dad every now and then, hearing a shout. Eventually I got a phone call from G saying they found him and to gather back on the street. G's dad was stood there totally fine, saying he went for a walk and didn't hear any shouting, not even us shouting for him. We walked off, turning around every now and then to check on G's dad. After about 4 times of turning round, he fucking snapped and screamed at us, "What the fuck are you looking at?" And we all nope.jpegged back home. I still don't know what the fuck happened that night, and I don't dare delve deeper into it as it fucking terrifies me. Additional notes: this family has a history of ghostly experiences, with G often telling me about things she's seen.
Personal story, I guess. So I work overnights at a local supermarket. We close at 11 p.m. and most of the third shifters, including myself, leave work at 4 a.m. Some stay later. I felt like I shouldn't share this story, but it's been long enough that I don't think anything will come from it. This happened over a year ago. I've been working at this job for now close to 2.5 years. For the most part it's a pretty normal job. You've got your shitty managers mixed with pretty cool co-workers. After a few months I fitted pretty well and had a well-rounded group of work buddies that I even went out to bars with every now and then. I'm sure I'm not the only person that starts to notice patterns and habits with people they see on an almost daily basis. Like where people like to spend their lunches at or who they generally sit with. One thing I started to notice was what cars people drove and where they liked to park. Not everyone had a spot, most people just took the closest spot, like me. But there were those couple of cars I noticed that were generally in the same spot or close to it. After a couple of months I could almost tell you who drove what car. I didn't always get a chance to see the people getting into or out of their cars, like people who worked early or later than I. There was one car that stood out to me though. It was an older Chevy Suburban. Maybe 2000 to 2003. It was a darker red color and was sort of beat up. It wasn't a junker or anything, just didn't look very well taken care of. The reason this SUV started to stand out to me was because of how far out it would be parked when I was leaving around 4 a.m. It seemed like it was always the farthest parked car in the lot. When you work the graveyard shift, things like this tend to keep your mind busy. You don't have to use a whole lot of brain power to stock things. So, I started to make mental notes after a few days of noticing how far out the SUV was parked every night. It didn't really make sense. People always fought for the closest spot. This SUV was always the farthest away. I would glance around on my way in around 10:45-50 p.m. every night to see if I could spot the SUV. I could never find it on my way in. I didn't really try very hard to find it though. Then on my way out around 4:05 to 10 a.m. I would look for it again. I could always find it on my way out every single night I worked without fail. After about 2 weeks of this I came up with a theory of whoever drove the SUV was just the type of person who clocked in during the 5-minute grace period people were given before they were considered late for their shift. It would also explain why they were always parked so far out, all the good spots would already be taken. I started taking note of who showed up last to clock in at night, and there just wasn't enough consistency to pick out who drove this SUV. Because I never worked past 4 a.m. I never would get to see who would get in, since they always seemed to work past 4. One night I even sat in my car for an extra few minutes to see if anyone came out to the SUV. I didn't stay long though, didn't want to seem like a creeper. After a solid 2 months of this, it started to really annoy me one night, for whatever reason. I wasn't obsessing over it, it was something that, like I said earlier, keeps my brain working during the boring hours of work. But that night it just really got at me. Finally, I asked a coworker about it. He said he had no idea what I was talking about. Fine. I asked someone else about it. Same response. Extra annoyed, I mentioned it at break to the group of guys I hung out with. During break we would sit in the dining area next to the cafe. It was at the front of the store and had those long glass window walls, or whatever they're called.
22 years old, renovating a house with my friend, boss. When we first came into the old house it was filled with old ass furniture, super dusty. It was the house of some old people that died, and we were fixing it up for their grandkids to sell. So, we are taking the tile out of an old bathroom, it's going to be all sheetrock. Shit is put on there with like fucking concrete, takes a long time hammering and chiseling. Friend leaves to go to hardware store, I'm along in this old house, upstairs bathroom. We took the attic hatch out to do the ceiling, no doors in the house, it's gutted for renovation. From where I am upstairs, I can lean to one side and see the attic hatch. Thing is fucking pitch black. I'm not scared of the dark or attics, so working hard. Hammering and chiseling this shit off the walls, and I hear noises that aren't consistent with the echoing of my hammer. Lots of echo, empty old house, all the furniture had been removed before we started work proper. Lean over, so the hatch is in my view, get this sudden gut-wrenching feeling that something is looking at me from up in the attic. I don't look up, I just move back into the bathroom. The feeling is still there, it can't leave the attic, but something is watching me from it. Nope for a while, decide to sit it out and wait for friend to get back. Hear noise downstairs, assume he is back, call out jokingly that took long enough. No response. Realize the noise wasn't him. Nope. JPG for a while, don't move, sit for what feels like house. Eventually hear his van pull up outside, and hear him come into the house calling my name. I don't reply, he comes upstairs and finds me in the bathroom noped out. Tell him the story, he laughs it off, we both hurriedly finish the job and leave. Still don't talk about it to this day.
I hate Greentext. I was participating in a reenactment one year. This was a Vietnam one, so I had my AR-15 along with several extra blank-loaded magazines. It was getting very dark, and most of the crowd had left. We talked to the group's captain, and he recommended night practice, basically a patrol in this abandoned cornfield. Sounded fun, so I said yes. After the first 2 scenarios were done, I was placed on the opposing force side. I went off into the woods and waited. That's when I noticed it was dead silent. All that could be heard was the occasional gust of wind through the dead stalks of corn. I glanced around the forest, then crawled out when the wind started up again. 2 loud cracks then filled the air, and I watched as an opfer walked out of the cornfield with his weapon up. This was followed by something standing up near the corn and firing again. Now, if you've never shot at night, it's a sight to see. The sudden light of the gun's flash makes everything freeze. It's to the point that you can quickly survey the area after a shot's fired, or so you think. Anyway, he's soon shot as well. So, I continue into the cornfield and lie down in a nice spot, hoping they'll come my way. I rest my rifle in a nice spot in my shoulder, and everything goes quiet. That's when I hear a deep breathing beside me. I slowly turn my head, looking to my right. It's dark as all hell, so I can't see a damn thing. I could use my light, but that'd give my position away like a fucking airborne at this point. I peer through the blanket of darkness, seeing what looked like fur. I slowly rolled over to my side and drew my knife, just in case it was a dog. I at least wanted a fighting chance. Something then moved in front of me. I quickly readjusted, but missed what it was. When I glanced back to where the breathing was, I just saw a bare space. I soon got up and moved, somewhat shaken at this point. That's when I heard another 2 cracks, along with the captain laughing. I walked right into his line of fire. That's it, game's done. His next idea was using the woods only. Okay, sounds fun. I load up a fresh mag and follow him in. It's him and I, plus a VC that was there for the actual event. I was at the back, in case they tried to flank or rear. After a few minutes of walking, I heard a rustling nearby. I called for them to hold it, then took a knee and looked toward the bushes where I heard the noise. I saw what looked like a person standing there. That's it, just standing. Figuring it was an op-4, I fired. Everything froze, and I could see what can only be described as a person dragged back from hell. They were beaten up and mangled looking, with pale white eyes. When I tried to take a closer look, it went black again. The captain glared at me for letting our position be known when there was nothing there. He didn't see whatever it was. We continued down the trail and hit the ambush, winning the fight. We gathered up, cleared our weapons, then began the trek back to camp. When we reached the field, I glanced around the group. We'd gone out with 6. I now counted 7, including myself in both times. Strange, but maybe I'd miscounted before. After all, it was dark and I was tired. When we reached the camp, I counted again. 6 including me. Something wasn't right. I asked about the other guy that was with us, and got funny looks as a response. So, I ignored it and went to sleep. The rest was uneventful. I've looked into this recently. I want to say skinwalker, but it doesn't fit. This thing didn't do harm. It also changed what it looked like several times, if it was the same thing. Either way, I haven't gone out at night for patrols since then.
I guess this is one of my stories that I best remember. I'll make it short and to the point, but the house I grew up in had a lot of activity. My whole family had things happen to them while living or staying there. But here is the story anyway. I have quite a few more if anybody's interested, but meh. Anyway, was quite young. Downstairs at around 12 a.m., my little sister was asleep on the sofa, and I thought it would be funny to mess with her. I walked up and poked her in the face a couple of times and tugged her hair, just sort of messing around. I was quite dumb when I was younger. Shortly I'm told to go to bed, so as a good little boy I head straight up, but while going up the stairs I get a sudden feeling of guilt, like I've done something very wrong. Shrugging it off, I just get into bed and start to fall asleep, but I feel something heavy on my chest, like a large weight has been put there. I tried to sit up and slowly managed to get my head to rise. Then I got a sudden pain in my face, and my head shot back into the pillows. The heavy feeling was still on my chest, and I just grabbed the covers, pulled them over my face and said I was sorry. The feeling soon went. Then I simply just slept and never messed with my little sister ever again.
An uncle of mine was telling me some stories about growing up on the ranch. He's my mom's oldest brother and pretty old at this point, but still a total badass. He mentioned a stretch of road 15 minutes or so from the ranch that's haunted. Uncle is 16. There's a dance at a neighboring ranch many miles away. Uncle is walking home after the dance. It's a lonesome walk down a long dirt path that meanders through hills and shit. Totally quiet, except for Uncle's footsteps. No light besides the moon and stars, and darkness all around him thanks to dense brush and trees along the road. Uncle hears a sound off the side of the path, deeper in the brush. Someone's walking towards him. Who's there? No answer. Uncle doesn't like this. He grips his pistol and stares into the darkness. Footsteps keep approaching, slowly. This feels off. Lots of thieves out here take advantage of people who travel alone, but they usually opt for the element of surprise. Still, whoever this is sounds huge. The footsteps are heavy. Uncle unholsters his gun, preparing to shoot if he needs to. The footsteps walk out of the brush, but there's nobody there. Uncle can see the footsteps in the dirt coming towards him. WTF? He scrambles backwards. Can't take his eyes off the approaching footsteps, can't even run, too confused and startled. Suddenly the footsteps dart forward really fast towards him. Uncle drops his gun and nearly tumbles over backwards. He hightails it out of there, running at top speed the entire way to the ranch. He can hear the heavy footsteps the whole way. He barrels through the ranch gate and the footsteps stop, but Uncle keeps going. Rushes into the house and locks the door behind him. Fast forward to the next morning. Uncle needs to go back to retrieve his gun, but his dad says, "Be more careful with your gun, son," and hands it to him. His dad had found it sitting just outside the ranch gates. My uncle said he'd written off the ghost stories for years until this happened.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.